prime thing is you have to win.
There you go. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Hey, Mark, settle down a little bit.
All right, welcome back to the Just Win podcast. I'm Ted Nguyen, that's Tashan Reed, and today we have a special guest on. That's Brandon Thorn, the authority on all things offensive line and defensive line. He's creator of Trench Warfare, and everybody goes to him for his O-line expert. The Raiders drafted Ashton Genty. They decided that they are okay or happy with their offensive line going into the season. And the big question is their offensive line ready to take the next step? Everybody thinks this offense is ready to take the next step. But is this offensive line ready? And to help us answer that, we have Brandon. Brandon, could you introduce yourself a little bit and before we get into it?
Yeah, for sure. So, Brandon Thorn. I run Trench Warfare newsletter through Substack. Write for Bleacher Report. Did all the scouting reports for their draft content for the offensive line for the 5th year in a row. Also partner with Offensive Line Masterminds. I do all their scouting for their yearly summit here in Texas. I've been doing that for about 8 years, and also contract with Establish the Run and do offensive defensive line analysis for them as well.
So, man, I always wonder, like, what got you into trenches, or why did that, hit home so much with you, that part of football specifically?
Yeah, well, I eventually got moved to the offensive line in high school, as one typically does. Most people aren't, seeking out to play offensive line when they play football, but they get kind of told to play it. And that happened to me as a junior in high school, and I played the next 2 years, and I was, a decent offensive lineman, but played in Florida, played in a really competitive class, football. So I got to see, a good amount of Division I caliber athletes, which, I wasn't, but, I kind of got a little bit of a taste of it then, but I've always been just a diehard NFL fan, football fan. I was always into scouting. I was a big Madden guy, so I knew all the rosters and all that. And offensive lineman was no different. So I grew up, kind of like being a big fan of Steve Hutchinson and Alan Faneca and, Walter Jones, Ogden, Pace, those kind of guys. And then eventually, after a military career, I had the opportunity to get out early, and I wanted to pursue my dream of being in scouting. And when I did that, joining social media, I saw that nobody was really talking about offensive line at that time in about 2013, 2014 timeframe. So I just saw an opportunity there to kind of really lean into it and fill that void. And I had people come in my path that helped me kind of, become more of an expert in that area. Duke Manyweather being the prominent one, but LaCharles Bentley, and then like Dan Hatman with the Scouting Academy, who Ted's familiar with, and just really leaned into it, and just put my head down, tried to learn more about it, and just kept building on itself. And yeah, I mean, here we are, and I'm doing it full time now, so it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, and you get to, you have all these star offensive linemen like, Lane Johnson and Quentin Nelson, like, you have that jersey right behind you. What's it been like, with those guys contacting you and working with you? Like, what do you do for them, and how's that been like for you?
Yeah, that's probably the coolest part. The Offensive Line Masterminds Summit that I, started going to with Duke when he first started 8 years ago. That was really the door into a lot of the relationships that I have. But it started a little bit before that too, because kind of how I created my social media presence, if you will, is through video. So showing my work. I believe that in the offensive line world, especially, you could have opinions, but if you don't show the video that is forming your opinions, then it doesn't really matter. So I really focused on video, and that's how I kind of got in the good graces, of a lot of offensive linemen. They saw what I was seeing, and, I think a lot of the time they agreed with it. And it also shined a light on the offensive line as well, which, especially 10 years ago on social media, I mean, couldn't really find a lot of offensive linemen executing things on film and on social media let alone TV or anything like that. And I just felt like it was a huge opportunity because, once people see what it looks like when Trent Williams is doing his thing, or Lane Johnson or Quentin Nelson or the best of the best, then they actually say, man, offensive line's kind of cool. And they do some unique stuff, especially for their body types. So I just, recorded a lot of what I saw and showed it to people, and that resonated with fans, but also players. And a lot of the players in the NFL today, Quentin Nelson being one, when he sent me that jersey, that relationship started when he was a junior in high school, because he was following my page, watching my highlights, trying to get an idea of what it looked like at the NFL level. So a lot of guys would come to my page on social media to do that starting in high school. And now all those guys are in the NFL. The guys who made it to the NFL were started in high school following me most of for the most part. And then offensive line masterminds being in that room every year with hundreds of them, pro offensive linemen, that is, and then also up and coming college guys. It's a cycle now where if you're playing offensive line in high school and you have aspirations to go to college or the pro game and you want to see what it looks like, techniques and things being executed at the highest level, I have, thousands of videos that you can check out. So yeah, it's been really cool to just try to elevate the position and just bring more eyes to it.
Yeah, and one of the ways me and Brandon started bonding early on was just appreciating the Raiders' old offensive line with the Kelechi Osemele,
Dude,
Rocky
I think
Hudson,
about that
and
line
Gabe
all the time.
Jackson.
Yep.
Yeah,
2015, 2016, man. Yeah. That was
they
one of the
were,
most underrated offensive lines.
yeah. I mean, they were amazing. They were just blowing guys off the ball, and the Raiders are hoping to get back to that at some point. So let's get into the Raiders' offensive line. The Raiders obviously drafted Ashton Genty and bypassed a chance to upgrade the right tackle position at number 6. If you were making a pick at 6, what would you have done?
It's a good question. I mean, I think Genty is tough to pass up. It just seems like he was such a clean cut, prospect in every respect. So I can't really say that that was like an egregious error or anything like that. But I thought, Armand Membu made a lot of sense there as well. I think you could have justified that one. That would have been probably my next, option there, for me personally. Just especially in this class that wasn't like the deepest, best tackle class. So to get a guy like Membu there would have been pretty enticing. But yeah, I mean, Genty seems like he's going to be a pretty good player. So I get it.
Yeah, I feel like, in bypassing on Mimbu and some of the guys that were available there, it kind of was a reaffirmation in how they feel about their offensive tackles that they currently have, and obviously Colton Miller, has been a long time starter at left tackle, but they, had DJ Glaze really sort of emerge as a surprise first year starter at right tackle last year. Miller is pretty much a known commodity at this point in his career, but what were some of your first impressions of Glaze, just kind of from what you were able to see from him last season?
Yeah, I was pretty encouraged by Glaze's film. All things considered, I thought he was certainly serviceable, functional. Had some really nice flashes. I think just his size. Whether it's his frame, his build, his length. Just the way he looks on film and the way he carries himself, especially at the point of attack when his hands are timed up well. You could see good play strength. I think his anchor's pretty good. It's just, to me, like, that's kind of the variance there was pretty high with that anchor in particular. I thought his hands needed a lot of work. He was oftentimes late with his strike timing, and that let guys get into his chest, and he kind of got pushed back in the pocket and compressed a little too often, especially for a guy as big and strong as he is. I think he didn't always play to that. However, I do think that it's there. It's just a matter of cleaning up his technique so it gets there more consistently. It remains to be seen whether he could do that or not. But he's a guy I liked pretty good amount coming out of Maryland. I compared him to Alaric Jackson coming out of my scouting report, and I thought he could have developed into that caliber of starting tackle, and I still think that's in the cards for him. It's just, yeah, I think he really has to clean up his hands and pass protection more than anything, and also some footwork stuff as well, opening up a little too early and letting guys kind of get across his face, softening that inside shoulder and allowing two-way goes. That's kind of something that most young tackles struggle with, and so it's not too alarming. But for a guy picked where he was to come into the lineup, play as many snaps as he did, and be functional at tackle, I'd say, pretty encouraging rookie year, all things considered.
What do you think his ceiling would be?
Yeah, I mean, the comparison to Alaric Jackson, that's probably the ceiling, I think. And Alaric just got paid. I mean, he got re-signed by the Rams at a modest deal, I believe. It wasn't, and I think that's kind of where best case I think you can get Delmar Glaze to is, a guy who you're going to pay again for another contract who is functional, not a difference maker, not going to match up against the elite level rushers one on one and be a guy you could rely on. You're going to, have to protect him a little bit, whether, scheme, varying things like that. He's going to have to be in the right situation to be a long term starter. But he's a guy I think you could probably win with at tackle long term, especially if he gets some things cleaned up with his technique and his consistency. So that's kind of how I see it. Like, right tackle, maybe like, I don't know, the 18th best right tackle in the league, something like that. Just throwing a number out there, middle of the pack ish, kind of starter who, especially a right tackle in the NFL. I mean, you wouldn't be too mad about that, getting him, where you did in the draft.
And like we talked about the Raiders, they passed on, addressing offensive line on day one, but they did, at tackle make an addition on day two with Charles Grant coming out of William and Mary. And Raiders fans in particular are a little bit scorned by the small school tackles after Brandon Parker, highest career win here. But what did you kind of think about Charles Grant as a prospect? I know he's kind of viewed as more of a developmental guy.
Yeah, I mean, I liked Grant a good amount. Had the opportunity to sit down with him as well and talk for about an hour over a film room for my newsletter, which was really cool. And just to hear the way he was coached, some of the background there, heavy zone type of scheme at William and Mary throughout his career. Both his offensive line coaches kind of majored in that. Um, and he's a very skilled run blocker, I would say, in the zone run game. His backside cutoffs are really good. He, on B blocks, or, just if he's individual on a guy, the guard has to get out of there. He could cut off a three technique. So I just thought like his skill level as a zone run blocker, especially for a small school, was very impressive. He's very physical. I think his play strength is okay. He certainly has the right mindset and competitive toughness, I think, to kind of, allow his frame and things to grow into themselves and get a little bit better weight, more strength. I think that's kind of the area that will keep him off the field initially. If he isn't winning a job outright, I think that would be the primary reason. But I think his athletic ability is better than it was testing wise in terms of how he was moving on the field on film. And with that skill level, I thought it was he's an impressive small school guy in this class. It was a bummer he didn't go to the Senior Bowl. I think he was still dealing with an injury that he had, but that would have been a huge opportunity for him. So I think that kind of hurt him. But yeah, I mean, I had a late third, early fourth round grade on him. I thought he could come in and fill a role for you, as a rookie. Maybe not start, but definitely, push for a job and just be a quality guy to have in the rotation. And yeah, so, and he was also taught the strike system that Scott Peters teaches, and Bill Callahan. So he was taught that by one of his coaches as well. So I think you see him work some of that into his game and pass protection, which is pretty cool. So yeah, he's a very interesting prospect who I thought you got him at kind of the right spot too. So it made sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I only watched a couple of his games, and you know better than me, but I thought he was far away from competing for a spot right away. I thought he might have been a bigger developmental project. So you think that he could come in and maybe compete for a spot right away?
Well, I mean, I think he could compete for a backup role right away for sure. Yeah, I mean, late third, early fourth for us. So a fourth round grade for our grading scale is a potential role player, so potentially being a backup.
Mhm.
And then a third round grade is a high level backup or potential starter. He had a very late third, early fourth round grade, so kind of a fringe. Like I see him as he's going to win a backup role for you, and he's potentially going to be like a swing backup, inside outside. I graded him as a tackle. I think he could stay there, and I think that's probably the best spot for him. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a good chance he's going to be one of your 7 or 8 best guys on the offensive line.
And I know he was pretty much a left tackle only in college. You think he could have the ability to play right tackle as well?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I was just talking about this on another podcast. I think when you're talking about switching positions, the key really is timing, both in the calendar year and in the player's career. So, of course, if you're asking a guy like Donald Penn to play right tackle late in his career, probably a bad idea, which we saw play out. But if you're asking a rookie to come in and day one, you're saying, okay, we're going to cross train you, or you potentially are going to line up at right more and you have 3 months to do it. Yeah, I don't really see any issue why that would be a problem.
Got it. Let's talk about the interior of the line a little bit. The Raiders came out and said it's going to be an open competition for who's playing guard, center, um, and one of the only additions the Raiders made was signing Alex Kappa, and Kappa had a pretty down year last year with the Bengals. Do you think he could bounce back?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think that's all or primarily health based, and I don't know the intricacies of his injuries. I know he's dealt with some of that in the past, going back to Tampa a little bit. But that's the question. If he is healthy, and he's back to, he gets like a clean bill of health and all that, I think he probably has the inside track to win the job. I mean, I just think having a veteran like him, with the amount of experience that he has, big game experience as well, a guy who's really good with his technique. Of course, he's physically not the most impressive looking guy. He's not the longest, not the most powerful, not the most athletic, but that's not why he got drafted and that's not why he has success. He's a technician. He's very good with his technique, leverage, being consistent with that. And then just he's played a lot of balls. So I think, especially on this offensive line, I think that would probably be a really nice guy to have on the interior while you sort everything else out with primarily young guys who are relatively inexperienced. So it all comes down to health, and I just don't know where he is in that regard. So it's hard to say, but if he was healthy, I do like him to be like the opening day starter.
And it feels like the centerpiece of that interior group is Jackson Powers Johnson, who, last year most people, figured he would be as a center, given that was his most successful position in college. But the Raiders actually started him out as guard. He ended up playing some center due to injury, but bounced back between those two spots. And after they let go of Andre James this offseason, looks like he's pretty much in line to make that full-time transition to center. What do you think about him, kind of at that interior spot? Do you think he's best at center or guard? And if he does play center, what do you think his upside is there?
Yeah, I like him at center more. That's the way I saw him, coming into the NFL as a prospect. He did play a little guard at the Senior Bowl and was very good there. But I mean, when you watch him on film, all of his tape that I saw was at center. I know he repped at guard in practice at Oregon a lot, but yeah, so I definitely think center is his best spot. I think that's where he's most comfortable. When you watch him on film last year, yeah, a little wild, I would say, in terms of how he plays, which is a good and a bad thing. I think he needs to rein that in a little bit and to get dialed in with footwork, um, in terms of getting into his fits better, more consistently. He's a charged up, high energy player. And I mean, you saw him diving into piles last year, game in, game out. I mean, it's fun to watch, but I can't imagine the coaches were too thrilled with some of the stuff he was doing. I mean, you gotta be able to rein that in, and the master at that is like a guy like behind me, like a Ryan Jensen. Like he crossed the line a little bit, but it wasn't detrimental to the team. And I think Jackson Powers Johnson, I will say it's better to have the problem where you have to reel a guy in than push him. You certainly don't have to push, Jackson Powers Johnson. I mean, he wants to finish guys. He has the right mentality, but I think he needs to just work on his technique, clean up his footwork so he can get into play with better positional leverage, and not lose cleanly as often. But in terms of the physical traits, the power, the athletic ability, the movement skills, with that demeanor, I mean, I still am pretty bullish on him. I liked him a lot coming out, and if he can just clean things up and add a little bit of polish to his game, I think the upside there is, you can have a very good starter at center. So definitely like a top 10 type of center, if not better, if things work out for him that way. But yeah, that's kind of how I saw him on film last year.
Does he have the shortest neck in the NFL, and does that help? Does that help as offensive lineman?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good observation. It's he has all traps and shoulders. I mean, he definitely throws his weight around, and it's kind of that like Takeo Spikes kind of look. Yeah, I mean, I think it actually just the way he's built, just being as stout as he is, his center of gravity is really good, natural leverage is really good. Combined with his power, that's what allows him to get underneath and inside of guys and deliver the amount of jolt that he does. So like, yeah, I want to see that be maximized a little bit more. And to do that, he has to play with better technique and leverage, positional hands, up and down leverage, all the different leverages that you play with as an offensive lineman. For him, it's kind of wild right now, but he has the build, he has the raw power to, that you don't see at center a lot in the NFL. So yeah, I'm still pretty bullish on him.
Oh, I've watched a lot of Parham or Meredith, and what are your opinions on them? And do you think they could be starters in a NFL?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like long-term starting guys, I think they're on the fence of being like long-term starters. Like Meredith last year he was fun. He's fun to watch. I mean, he classic kind of undrafted free agent mentality, how he attacks guys. He's undersized. He has to play aggressive in pass protection or he's going to get run over, or at least compressed. So he has a very attacking mentality. He's a big two-hand punch guy, which is, kind of a dangerous life to live in pass protection at guard in the NFL. It can result in soft edges, short corners. And I think that's the biggest thing that's going to hold him back is his margin for error in pass protection one-on-one is very slim. His edges are easily accessible. So I think his ceiling is pretty, distinctly like capped, in terms of being a high end pass protector. He's a guy who's barely going to get by in that regard. But I do appreciate the way he plays. He gets the most out of what he has there. And in the run game, I think he's pretty solid. So if worst case, I think swing kind of interior backup sort of guy who could probably stick around for a long time, like I don't know, maybe like a Lucas Patrick kind of guy who he's had a couple seasons where he started double digit games, but he's just a guy who continually hangs around, and is just kind of a valuable guy to have on the roster. I think Meredith could be that sort of guy, but I don't see him as like a surefire long-term starter. And then Parham, I get torn on Parham when I watch him because he has these flashes where I think he looks for work at a very high level. He has a lot of knockdowns in that regard. He's physical. Another guy with great natural leverage and center of gravity, in terms of just, he's a shorter guy and he plays with good play strength when he's able to get inside of guys. It's just he doesn't have a lot of mass or girth to him, so I think he could kind of get overrun a little bit against like like the Derek Brown-esque sort of defensive tackles, the real big hulking sort of presences that are bring a very good or elite level bull rush. Those guys can give him problems. So he's not a guy who's going to set the most firm pocket in the world, but he's kind of a sticky run blocker, I think. He's going to be a physical presence when he's uncovered, and I think he's a good puller. So he's interesting. I don't want to say that he's a surefire long term starter. I lean more so on a guy you're probably looking to replace, but could get by with, in the short term.
And the Raiders did draft and one interior offensive lineman, Caleb Rogers, out of Texas Tech, and he started pretty much games at every position besides center throughout his college career. But the Raiders said that they're going to play him at guard. Maybe he could get into the mix as a rookie. But what were kind of your high level thoughts about him, just kind of coming out of the draft?
Yeah, it's kind of a similar grade to Grant, except more like high fourth round grade. That's where I put him. I compared him to Ryan Bates, who's kind of a swing interior backup sort of guy. And you mentioned it. I mean, he had 55 career starts and double digit at two different positions, four starts at four of the five positions. So he's another guy who I think you have to kind of bake into the fact that his leadership skills are pretty renowned inside the program. At the Senior Bowl, he was one of the more vocal presences there, kind of took command, a lot of the time when he was out there. I thought he had a pretty good Senior Bowl as well, playing center, which he didn't really play a whole lot of. I think he may have repped it in practice at Texas Tech, but didn't start there. And so he played that for the first time in Mobile, and I thought he played pretty well at it. So he's a guy who, having that proven versatility in his back pocket, with that ability also that he showed to play center at the Senior Bowl, he's a guy who's probably going to fit in somewhere. But I like the way he's built. I think his play strength is solid. He's a guy with pretty reliable strength, and when you have that versatility and you're strong enough to kind of get it done at all the positions, it's just a matter of, it's always the case when you have guys who have a lot of versatility is, are they able to toe that line of being, good enough at one position as opposed to not good enough at any of them? And I just really am eager to see kind of where he fits in. To me, I think kind of left guard would be a spot, just looking at the depth chart as it is right now, to where I think he would be my pick almost to win that job. I don't know what they're talking about, in terms of the coaching staff and whatnot, but to me, that seems like he has a good shot at that job.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing we know about Pete Carroll is it's really going to be a competition, and I don't think he's going to give the edge to anybody just because of draft standing or whatnot. So we'll see how that plays out. But I guess the final question about the offensive line is: do you think that there's enough for this line to be an average to an above average unit?
It's a good question. I lean towards no on the above average, at least this year. Maybe long term, if some of these picks, work out, I think that that's in the cards. But for this season specifically, I lean towards middle of the pack, below average. It's just, right now there's more questions than answers, and it's tough, especially at this time of the calendar. Maybe in August, we can have a little bit of a different conversation. But Colton Miller is, hands down your best starter. As we know, Colton Miller came into the year. I think he only had 2 padded practices entering the season last year. Anytime a guy misses an off season like that, chances are they're not going to start great. He didn't. But I thought as the year went on, he played better, more like himself. So entering this year with the full off season, I think we're probably going to see Colton Miller at his best. So assuming you have a firmly above average starting left tackle, then it's a matter of, okay, let's look at the other 4. And, Glaze and JPJ, I think, are the 2 surest answers that you have. And there's some real question marks there. So at this point in the calendar, I lean towards below average, and they could probably get to average. But I will say I also like the idea of Chip Kelly being there, just in terms of especially what Ohio State was last year. The construction of their offense. I like the multiple run game, kind of majoring in zone, minoring in gap. I like the run pass splits. I liked how they was constructed. So I think they're going to probably have a pretty good infrastructure to operate within, and that's encouraging. So you probably only need like a middle of the pack offensive line to have success offensively. So, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at and how I see it.
I guess transition into the defensive side of the ball. His defensive line had high expectations. last year after, adding Christian Wilkins in the offseason, but injuries really derailed them before they got going. I mean, lost Malcolm Kuntz to a torn ACL before the season. Wilkins with now with a Jones fracture, even Max Crosby, who coming into the season had never missed a game in his career, had that nagging high ankle sprain and ended up ending the season. And so we never really got to see that unit as it was, kind of build. But going into this season, at least at this point in the offseason, it looks like that unit would probably be more so intact. But starting at defensive end, what do you kind of make of this group? Obviously Max Crosby leads it and is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. But overall, how do you kind of feel about their defensive end room?
I mean, I feel pretty good with Max Crosby, in there. It's hard not to. That it sets the pecking order, for the rest of the guys. Nobody has to be the guy. So anytime you have that construction of a room in place, you feel a little bit better about it, I think. So, you just need a guy to be a number two. And between Tyree Wilson and Malcolm Kuntz, assuming he's good to go health wise, I think you're going to get that. At least a functional number two, and then whoever doesn't take that role can be a functional rotational guy. So from that standpoint, I feel pretty good about it. I think Tyree Wilson has some flashes. I like the fact that he's not backing down from anybody on film. I just watched Trey Smith. I'm making a tape for Trey, and when he kind of got matched up against Tyree a couple times. I mean, it's cool to see a guy who's young like that utilize his length, play with some power, and then show some competitive toughness as well. Maybe to me, I haven't studied Tyree, game, snap in, snap out, but I've seen the pressures and sacks that he's had, and to me, it looks like maybe that Trayvon Walker kind of arc. I mean, a guy who's big, long, and has some power. Just he has a bull rush that you have to respect. And I think that's a good starting point. It's just now a matter of, can he develop a reliable counter? Can he have a long arm move to work off of that? And how does he build out his pass rush plan? I think that remains to be seen. But I think the length and the power and the demeanor to me are pretty encouraging. Maybe not where you want it to be with as high of a draft pick as he was, but I still do think that there's something there. I'd be pretty encouraged by it. And then Kuntz, 2023, man. I mean, like, he's one of the best guys I charted in terms of high quality wins. He was a guy I was very excited about coming into the year. So I still have a lot of hope for him to turn into something, as well. So, I mean, all in all, I feel like this is definitely a middle of the pack room, if not above average, because you got Max there.
And final question, we held you for long enough, but with the defensive tackles is a big need for the Raiders, with Christian Wilkins kind of questionable coming back from that foot injury, and Butler kind of being, or a guy that should be a rotational guy.
Yeah. I mean, Wilkins, obviously the foot injury, that's what it is, right? Foot. It sounds concerning. So, assuming he is healthy, just kind of what he was in Miami, this is an elite run defender who's a solid pass rusher. I honestly thought that the contract was a little rich, because you're not getting, a super high end pass rusher. You're getting a guy you got to respect as a pass rusher, but he's not, like anywhere near, an elite level pass rusher. Kind of the thing that he brings is he's an elite level run defender, special run defender. So hopefully he can get back to that. And then Butler's a guy this guy's been useful for a long time, going back to his first stint in New England. I think Adam Butler is one of the best interior pass rushers on stunts in the NFL, and he has been for a long time. So he's a really good guy if you're running, TT stunts and Ts, ETs, whatever. He's a guy who's able to pierce, gaps and get under guys, and he has a good forklift move, and like he's just a slippery kind of pass rusher who is a headache. And he's a guy I really like to have in the rotation. But I mean, apart from that, man, I mean, I don't feel as good about the interior room, just because you don't have like another surefire starter here, and with questions with Wilkins, I mean, it's pretty dicey to me. I don't know how you guys feel, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, from, what I was reporting, and Vic Tafer, who's our other Raiders writer for transitions to the Niners beat, is it's definitely something that they're being cautious with. I don't know if they're super concerned. I think they believe he'll be ready to go by the start of training camp. He'll probably be pretty limited in OTAs. So that's the hope. But, anytime you have a foot injury with a guy at that size who a lot of his game is based in, his movement skills and his footwork, like it's always going to be scary, right? And so I think they're going to be careful with it and not push it too much. But the hope internally is at least that he'll be ready to go by the time week 1 rolls around.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. Because it's he's the linchpin for sure. It all hinges on him. So
Yeah, and I mean, as we talked about, like last year really got derailed by injuries. But if this unit is able to kind of, shake off those issues from last year between Crosby, Kuntz, and Wilkins, you said that kind of have some questions about the offensive line being below average to average. But what do you think the ceiling for this defensive line could potentially be for the season?
yeah, assuming all that works out with those injuries, I definitely think above average is in the cards, as a high range outcome here. I don't know that I see a whole lot more than that. It's hard to say that for sure. I don't see a lot of depth, so I think the margin for error is just pretty slim, especially with the interior. I just don't know about the young guys and just, a lot of questions. I mean, Butler is a firm kind of rotational number 3, and then Wilkins is a good one, but injuries. So, yeah, but pure upside ceiling wise, I think above average for sure, because Kuntz, Crosby, and Wilkins, just those 3, with Butler coming in on obvious pass downs, like, and then Tyree spelling the edges, like, yeah, to me, that's pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like a line that needs to be in a passing script. Like the offense needs to do its job and get get the opposing offense in a passing script, and that's where they could potentially thrive. Because, like you said, they have a lot of guys that are really good on stunts. Like Crosby's great on stunts, Wilkins great on stunts, Butler and Tyree Wilson. One of the best things he does is just jump a bunch of gaps on stunts. So if they could just get the offense to get a passing script, then that's probably where they're going to be best at.
Yep. Yeah, I agree totally. For sure.
But yeah, really appreciate you having taking the time out to talk Raiders and offense and defensive line with us. Held you for 38 minutes, so really appreciate it again. And awesome stuff, man.
For sure. Thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on.
All right. Thank you for Brandon Thorn for joining us. If you guys aren't subscribed to Trench Warfare, make sure you guys do that. Again, he has an interview with Raiders tackle Charles Grant. You guys check out, and he talks to a bunch of offensive line prospects and stars in the NFL. That's really insightful. So check out that newsletter and check out his website. So we're gonna get to fan questions with mini camp coming up this week, right?
Yes, it's on Friday. So all the rookies get out there on Friday and start getting to it.
All right. First question from Mr. Mikey Stacks asks, any signs of a Jacoby Myers extension coming?
Not at this point. Well, obviously we talked about it, but Colton Miller kind of had a short-lived time where he didn't report to voluntary OTAs over a contract dispute, and he returned to action last week, even though he hasn't gotten a new deal done. And, outside of Max Crosby, it seems like this regime is standing pretty pat on holding off, at least for a little bit, on potential extensions until they get deeper into the process and get to know the guys and learn the guys a little bit better, both, on the field and off the field. And so, I think he's a player that it could make sense to extend. He's going into the final year of his deal and coming off the best season of his career. And he's still, only about 30 years old, so still should have a few years left being a productive player. But at this point, hasn't been really anything substantive on the extension front.
Yeah, and the Raiders made some changes in the front office. They hired, sorry, I'm blanking on his name right now. The Howie Roseman's right-hand man from the Eagles.
Are you talking about the
Anthony
hires
Patch,
I just made?
he's a top Eagles scout there, and one of the things the Eagles do really well is they pay for their extensions early on in the process, so they don't wait until the last year where a player might hold out. So I think, to me, that's the modern and right approach. I hope maybe Patch influences Spy Tech a little bit in that area. All right, next question. Who are your guys' dark horse rookies to make the 53-man roster from Pure Pizza Alien?
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously a lot of the guys picked on the first 2 days are pretty much locks to make the team unless something drastic happens. So, I'd probably look at, maybe one of the UDFAs, Josh Joyner. He's a defensive end out of Minnesota who I believe Dane Brugler, our draft analyst, had him graded as fifth round prospect and kind of that speed rusher type. He kind of has a similar mold to his game as Malcolm Kuntz. And as we talk about with Brandon, I think you feel pretty good about the top three defensive ends in the room, but I think that fourth spot could be up for grabs. Charles Snowden probably is the favorite right now, but I think if Joyner has a strong offense, he could potentially, take that role from him. So of the UDFAs that they sign, I think he's probably the one that jumps out the most that could have a chance to end up making a 53-man roster.
Yeah, I haven't dived into the undrafted free agents. You've definitely done the work on that aspect. But to me, I think Tommy Mellott has a chance to make this team. I mean, it's going to be difficult because he's transitioning from quarterback, but the team does have a need at slot, especially a quicker slot that Tommy could potentially be. He could be a kick returner, punt returner. I mean, you just look at that athleticism there. I think maybe he could carve himself a role as a returner early on and then work his way into the rotation as a receiver. But it's going to be a tough transition. But I like his athleticism, and I like kind of that Julian Edelman comparison. All right. Cam Miller, floor and ceiling from We the Roses.
Yeah, I feel like the floor is pretty clear. He's obviously not making the team. As a 7th round or 6th round pick is never really a guaranteed thing. They do have a thin quarterback room. Once you get past Geno Smith, we talked about it. Kind of seeing what Aiden O'Connell's future with the franchise might be is still a little bit up in the air. And then at number 3 spot, obviously they don't have to necessarily roster a third quarterback, but if they do, Cam Miller has as good of a shot as anyone. Like Carter Bradley, I would put them in the same bucket. Ceiling wise, I think it's really just being a serviceable backup. I think if you get that out of a 6th round quarterback, that's a win. He never needs to start a game, in his career for that to be a solid draft pick. And so, he has some nice mobility. He has a solid arm. He's a little bit small for a quarterback. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a dark shot or, shot in dark to think that he'd be a starter one day, but he could just be like a functional developmental backup. I feel like that's a nice ceiling for him.
Yeah, I haven't watched a lot of Cam Miller yet, but I promise you the Twitter thread is coming, so pay attention for that. But since I haven't watched him, I'm just going to compare him to North Dakota State quarterbacks. I'll say his ceiling is Carson Wentz, which isn't bad in the 6th round.
Carson Wentz, MVP caliber season.
And his floor is Trey Lance. So there you go. All right, next question. Is it probable they will add another meaningful free agent signing before training camp? By Kevin Lockett. I think there's Tyler Lockett out there. That's a
he signed. He's out there. Yeah.
Oh, who's he with?
I forget, but I remember he got signed recently.
Yeah,
but he's not my order free agent
later on. But I think there's still Jalen Ramsey out there. That's not a free agent signing, but that's a potential trade that could happen after June 1st, because I believe that's when the Dolphins will save the most money. But I just think it makes a lot of sense for the Raiders as far as just fitting in with the roster, because they have a huge need at nickel. He could play a little outside corner. They need some veteran leadership. But as far as timeline of the Raiders, do they feel like they are in win now mode? Because that is a win now type of move. But you have Geno Smith in building. You drafted a running back at number 6. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't expect a major move at this point, like a trading for Jalen Ramsey, but I think a move of significance could happen in free agency. I still think they have a few question marks, particularly on defense. I think linebacker is still a position that could be worth making addition. Kazir White is probably one of the better linebackers available right now, and then nickelback I still think is a pretty major need. And there's Mike Hilton and a few other veteran cornerbacks who have some experience playing in the slot who could be picked up. And then maybe even receiver. We'll see how OTAs go. They invested in a lot of young guys, Dante Thornton, Jack Besh, and then Tommy Millo getting involved there as slot receiver. But I could still, see a need for a veteran receiver there. And there's still some intriguing guys out there like Amari Cooper. I know some Raiders fans are, still scoring about him, but there's a couple, starting caliber veteran receivers out there as well. So between one of those three position groups, I wouldn't be shocked if they added somebody. But I think at this point, you might as well wait till after OTAs, right? See how the rookies perform, see how some of the young players develop, and have to also keep in mind, like, these coaches haven't really interacted with these guys on the field yet, given that they're a new regime, and they've really been limited to just mostly strength and conditioning workouts and OTAs and meetings so far. So I think it makes sense, first off, to see what you have, and then once we get past mandatory minicamp in June, if you feel shaky about a couple spots, see what's still left out there in free agency and kind of show up the roster before training camp gets going.
Yeah, I think Kaiser White makes a ton of sense. I mean, they just need a linebacker that could cover. Right now, they have a lot of run stuffing linebackers. So getting him in the building, I think, would make sense. I mean, it's not the best option, but at this point, you're not trying to add a star or even a guy that you could shoe in as a starter. All right, last question. What would you guys deem as a successful season for the Raiders by Day Jones?
I think the goal is competency. Like, they're not going to say that the goal is that low, but I think that's a success. This franchise has just been mired in so much dysfunction, since that playoff run that they made a few years ago. And they can't really get their head above water. But I think if they come into the season and they're somewhere around a 500 team and they're competitive throughout the entire year, and you start to see some promise looking ahead to next season, I think that should be considered a successful season for the Raiders. Like, you obviously hope for more. I'm sure they plan on trying to make the playoffs, obviously, like every other team in the league. But I think even if they miss the playoffs, just becoming a functional, competent, well-run organization again and translating that to the field, I think that'd be a successful 2025 season for them.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it has to be playoffs. I mean, you get in Geno Smith, you draft Ashton Genty, number 6 overall. You bring in Pete Carroll. I mean, it's going to be hard. I'm not saying they will make it, and they have a roster with question marks, as Brandon outlined, but the potential is there. But they have to thread the needle. It's not going to be easy. They can't afford a ton of injuries, but or not even a ton of injuries. They can't afford one or two devastating injuries. Could be pretty bad for this team. And if Christian Wilkins is not back to full strength, that could be a potentially season-altering type of injury as well. So it's going to be hard, but I think, to me, with the pieces that are in place, a veteran quarterback, I think the goal has to be playoffs. To me, I think competence is nice, but with what you've done, I mean, if you had a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback in place, and maybe you could just say 500 is cool, but I think with everything they've done this offseason, I think the goal has to be playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal, but just being realistic, like, looking at this roster, I mean, we talked about, the offensive line is probably below average to average this year, and they have some pretty major holes on defense, I would say. Like, in this division, I just think it's going to be tough. Like, it's possible, it's going to be difficult, like you said, but I don't think I don't think it's like a huge failure if they miss it. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out.
Okay, I guess it depends on how your 500 looks like. Like, if you're 500 and then, like, the offense is doing really well, but let's say the defensive holes are a little too much to overcome, because there are a lot of holes on the defensive roster, then maybe you could say, all right, we're headed in the right direction. We have a quarterback in place, and if we get this defense fixed and maybe a piece or two in the offensive line, then we'll be really competitive the next year. But yeah, that's all we have for you today. Make sure you guys subscribe, hit the like button on YouTube, leave reviews on Spotify and Apple. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
All right, y'all. Peace.